Pawn to e4, best by test. Pawn to c5. Knight to f3. Pawn to e6, a French Sicilian. Pawn to c3, white chooses an Alapin setup. The c3 pawn helps in the central expansion, but leaves the b1 knight and c1 bishop momentarily undeveloped. Knight to f6. Pawn to e5. Knight to d5. Pawn to d4. Pawn to d4. Pawn to d4. Pawn to d6, hitting the head of the spear. Pawn to a3, controlling the jumps of the knight and restricting black's dark square's bishop. Pawn to e5. Pawn to e5. Bishop to e7. Bishop to d3, building the wooden shield and preparing short castle. Knight to d7, putting pressure on e5, the c8 bishop can later develop via fianchetto. King to g1. Pawn to b6. Knight to d2. Knight to c5. Bishop to c4. It seems that white has lost a tempo. The bishop has moved twice in the opening, first to d3 and then to c4. Knight to c7, a obvious move. Black gives the tempo back. It was better to defend the knight with the bishop. Pawn to b4. Knight to d3, a mistake. Black wants the dark square's bishop. However, the knight has spent many tempos just to get exchanged. Knight to e4. The horse hides behind the shadow of the e5 pawn. Knight to c1. White to play. What to move? If queen to d8, a great move. And white has a development advantage. Queen to c1, a mistake, was played in the game. White prefers to keep the queens on the board. Bishop to b7, attacking the e4 knight. Rook to d1, the best defense is the attack. Knight to d5. Bishop to d5, a obvious move. It was better to prevent black from castling by giving a check on b5. Pawn to d5. Black takes with the pawn to keep the bishop pair and to create a passed d-pawn. Knight to g3, a obvious move. It was not necessary to move the knight, because the d-pawn is pinned. White has in mind to maneuver the knight towards d6. However, black can stop that plan by restricting the knight with g6. King to g8. Knight to d4. It's knights versus bishops. White has to find a way of blocking black's bishops and find stable squares for her horses. Rook to c8. Queen to b2. Rook to e8, a obvious move. It was better to restrict the g3 knight by moving Gary to g6. Knight to f5. Bishop to f8. Knight to b5. White has the advantage. Her knights are more active than the two bishops. Rook to e6. Knight to a7, a obvious move. I've heard the value of a pawn is 2 tempos. White exchanged 2 tempos for the pawn. One for grabbing it and another for moving the knight back to the game. Black will use those tempos to activate her pieces. The position is equal again. Rook to c4. Knight to b5. Rook to e4. Knight to d4. Black to play. What to move? If rook to e5, a mistake. The e4 rook is in troubles. Triple attack. Queen to e5, white is winning. Rook to e8 was played in the game. Knight to f3. A few seconds ago the knight was on a7, and now is on f3. White has performed in total 5 consecutive horse jumps. Pawn to g6. Knight to g3. Rook to c4. Rook to e1, defending the e5 pawn. Queen to c7. Rook to e2. Bishop to g7. Rook to e1. Pawn to d4, a great move, opening the light square's dragon. Knight to e4, a mistake. White's idea was to activate the passive g3 knight using tactics. It looks like the knight is severing the connection of the rooks and the e5 pawn. However, the knight can quickly get out of the way, giving a check on f6. Pawn to d3, a great move, attacking the e2 rook and unblocking the 4th rank for the rook. Suddenly all black pieces are active. White has near 1 minute on the clock and black 10 minutes. Can white survive? Knight to d6. Black to play. What to move? If rook to g4, a brilliant move, sacrificing the e8 rook and pinning the g-pawn who defends the f3 knight. Bishop to f3, a great move, sacrificing the queen. And the checkmate on h1 is unstoppable. Bishop to f3, a mistake, was played in the game. Black's advantage evaporates. Pawn to f3. Pawn to e2. Knight to e8. Queen to c6, a dubious move. The best defense is the attack. It was better to counter with rook to c2, attacking white's queen and protecting the passed e2 pawn. Queen to e2. Rook to c2. The black rook prepares to go behind white's queenside pawns. Queen to e4. Queen to e4. Rook to e4. White is winning, she is 2 pawns up and has the control of the center. Bishop to h6, a dubious move, with the idea of attacking the queenside pawns with rook and bishop. However, white can prevent that plan by cutting the diagonal with f4. Knight to f6. King to g7. Pawn to a4. Bishop to d2. Knight to d5, defending b4 and attacking b6. Rook to b2. King to g2. Rook to b1. Pawn to e6. The pawn clears the way for the rook. Pawn to e6. Rook to e6. The b4 pawn is untouchable. Pawn to b5. Rook to e7. King to h6. Pawn to b5. Bishop to b4. Rook to b7. Rook to b2, X-raying white's king. Knight to f6. Pawn to g5. Knight to e4. Bishop to a5. Black is making hard to advance the b-pawn. Rook to b8. King to h5. King to h3. Rook to b3. King to g2. Rook to b2. Rook to c8. White prepares a trick. The b5 pawn is untouchable. Black problem is her vulnerable king. White can weave a checkmate net by cutting off black's king retreat with rook to c6 followed by knight to g3. King to h6. Rook to c5. Bishop to d2. Rook to c6. King to g7. Rook to c7. King to g6. Knight to d2. Rook to d2. The game continued for 50 moves more. The endgame is winning for white, but is not so easy. White even lost the advantage some moves later. But after mistakes by both sides, Divya managed to win. Perhaps that's why Tarish said that all rook endings are drawn. Can you beat Stockfish from this position? Try it. Check the link in the description.